Feminism has gone too far. This is something I've heard many times over the last year or so, from both men and women. I've come across it in the expected places online, but it has also been uttered by people around me, including friends of mine who are usually quite measured in their views. My first instinct when I heard this was to ask what they meant by that. What I got back was a confused bramble of an answer. It mixed criticism of a feminism that excluded men, of protest tactics, of women quotas in companies. This criticism sometimes took a form of victimisation, with men now asked to do too much, both be the breadwinner and take care of the household, that men were being replaced by women in certain roles. Some felt that issues specifically related to men were largely ignored because of feminism. It involved discussions around biology, gender capabilities, and even trans rights. Like any sensitive topic, emotions and strong opinions can get in the way. Oversimplifications can be made, nuance lacking. So have women's rights gone too far? I've tried to understand where this comes from, unpacked the topic, sort out the facts, tried to remain balanced. The reason why I'm doing this video is that it can lead to harmful stereotypes, prejudice against a group of people, backlash against women's rights, which are human rights. Through my research, I also came across issues which are specific to men, which do indeed get less attention. This speaks to all of us, women and men, because we are all part of the conversation. Before starting, I want to begin with these tools for greater understanding. It's a base that can be applied when tackling complex issues in general. You may be watching this and already have some clear views on women, men, gender relations, but what you think or have experienced is not necessarily a fair representation of reality. If you know one misogynist man, that does not make all men misogynist. You may know a couple who strives for a 50-50 split of house chores or childcare, but that does not mean a majority of couples do. Try to abstract yourself from your personal views and experiences. Being intellectually curious is a big asset in life. Put yourself in the state of mind that you are here to learn. 3. Keep in mind that one data point can only show you one aspect, so multiple data sets inevitably provide greater depth and understanding. Some data can also be outdated, not applicable in the case I'm studying, or it can be clear that more data gathering is required. 4. People don't necessarily have the same understanding of the same words. If I say the words liberalism, socialism, wokeism, or feminism, this may invoke something different in you than me. So agreeing on precise definitions of words matters. Blanket statements like all feminists are or all cops are likely wrong and probably unhelpful, so best avoid them. So here is a table of contents of what we're going to get through. Yes, I'm aware it's long, but that is what is needed to go in depth. But before we look at objective measures of societal power, economic, corporate, academic, or political, to see whether women have overtaken men or have been left behind by women, we'll have a quick look at the laws in countries to determine whether women and men have the same rights. Thinking about the word feminism, in itself, it englobes this equality in rights. Women seeking to have the same opportunities as men, and to be treated in the same way. We have to acknowledge that women and men don't enjoy the same rights in many countries of the world. I wanted to start with legislation on domestic violence, dating from 2023, which targets all genders, but in practice, women are mostly the victims of it. The World Health Organization indicated in March 2024 that globally about 1 woman in 3 worldwide has been subjected to either physical and/or sexual intimate partner violence, or non-partner sexual violence. If the answer is no, so the countries in orange, it could be that there is no such legislation. The law omits one or more forms of domestic violence, lacks sanctions or protection orders, does not criminalize marital rape. The yes-no answer is maybe not misleading as such, but maybe having more shades of colour, with percentages, for example, would show a more complete picture. This leads us to our first data check. There are a few of these pauses in the presentation to make us think more about what we're seeing, the data, and develop our critical thinking. Women face different challenges depending on the country they live in. In the European Union alone, there are 3 countries, Andorra, Malta, and Poland, where abortion is criminalized with strict penalties, with women restricted on their access to clinical care. As we saw, the yes no format, if it gives clarity, it also doesn't explain the nuance within. Furthermore, we have to ponder where having equal rights equals to equal lives. Thinking about domestic violence, a country may criminalize it, but how practical is it for victims to come forward, gather evidence? How seriously is a complaint of harassment or violence taken? Yes, there are still countries where, when parents die, if there is no will, sons and daughters do not have the same rights to inheritance. We have to consider that past laws were not made inclusively, excluding women from certain rights, and of the need to update laws as society moves forwards towards greater gender equality. This map, showing equal access to financial services for both genders, paints a bleaker picture of equality at first, but it requires us to dig a little deeper. In the countries in purple, the law prohibits gender discrimination by banks or other financial institutions. It requires equal treatment in financial transactions, business activities, financial assistance, and access to goods and services. You may be quite surprised to see the likes of Switzerland and Norway in orange here. According to the World Bank, in Norway, for example, a woman can sign a contract, register a business, open a bank account in the same way as a man, but there is no specific law prohibiting discrimination against women in access to credit, which other countries in purple on the map would have. Switzerland, for example, is interesting because until recently, the retirement age was higher for men than for women. 65 for men, 64 for women. Starting in 2026, however, the retirement age will be gradually equal to 65 for both genders in 2028. For now, though, why do you think the retirement age was higher for men than women? One measure of economic inequality is the gender pay gap, which tells the difference in wages or income between women and men. This data is in median earnings, i.e., the gap here captures differences between men and women in the middle of the earnings distribution, and they cover only full-time employees and self-employed workers. The differences vary per country, as you can see. Less than 5% for the best performing countries, while more than 20% in the countries of Japan, Estonia, and South Korea. The OECD average gender pay gap is at 11%. What are some of the explanations for this gap? Sectoral segregation. The OECD estimates that around 24% of the gender pay gap is related to the overrepresentation of women in relatively low-paying sectors, such as care, health, and education. The glass ceiling effect. You may have heard of this metaphor before that can be applied to women, representing an invisible barrier that prevents them from rising beyond a certain level in a hierarchy. There is therefore an underrepresentation of women at the top of the hierarchy, where higher paying jobs are. Unequal share of unpaid work. Women are more likely than men to stop working or reduce their hours in order to take care of children and relatives. They are also more likely to opt for flexible hours rather than higher pay. We're going to spend more time on this in a few slides. Pay discrimination. Even if women do reach these higher earning jobs, there's no guarantee of equal pay. Indeed, there are cases where women earn less than men for doing equal work or work of equal value. Data shows that the gender pay gap is typically higher at the top than the bottom end of the wage distribution. The highest difference at the EU level were managers, 23% lower earnings for women than for men. Data check. When you come across any graph or data, it's important to think about what information could be lacking. The OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, only comprises 38 countries. There are no big players like China or India, no countries in Africa or the Arabian Peninsula. The gender pay gap may be better or worse depending on where you are in a country. A regional breakdown would give us a more complete picture. We'll highlight this a little more later. This is the uncontrolled pay gap, but there is also something called the controlled pay gap, which we'll look into in a minute. Again, a more complete picture of the gender wage gap would break down some of this data in smaller categories, such as type of job or age, for example. So far, the data analysed was the uncontrolled gender pay gap. The controlled gender pay gap, on the other hand, controls for differences in job titles, work experience, industry, location, and other factors. In other words, it compares what men and women working in similar jobs with similar qualifications and profiles are paid. As you can see, the gender wage gap shrinks dramatically to just 1% difference. For every dollar made by a man, a woman makes 99 cents. Disclaimer that some of the data on this topic differs depending on the source, which is normal considering various actors have gathered the data differently. This particular set here, the Gender Pay Report, draws on data from over 600,000 US workers. However, all data backs the same trend. Always important to use multiple data sets and make sure it is reliable and up to date. Let's complicate things a little further. Remember when I spoke of regional differences? Here is an illustration of that. Interestingly, the BBC analysis of 250 metropolitan areas looked at under 30s only, showed that there are parts of the USA where women earn more than men. But in only 22 of the 250 analysed, that's just short of 9%. Trying to understand why is key here. Here are some takeaways. First, education is a factor. The places where women have parity or out-earn men, mostly in cities along the country's east and west coasts, have a higher percentage of young women with degrees. Completion of bachelor degrees at universities tends to boost earnings, and the pay gap tends to narrow down. 2. The type of jobs in these metropolitan areas matter. For example, the second largest employer in Wenatchee is the Metropolitan School District, where most of these jobs are taken up by women. We'll look more into the academic world later. On the other hand, places with a high proportion of jobs in manufacturing, such as Elkhart Goshen, mostly taken up by men, showed a high gender pay gap. This is data exclusively for under 30s, but the gender pay gap increases the more you age. Remote work also widens the pay gap for women. Finally, there is something called the motherhood penalty. Let's look more into that. Does having a child impact pay for women? Yes, it does, and not in a positive way for earnings. The motherhood penalty refers to the obstacles faced by mothers when it comes to career development, opportunities, but also pension and salary gaps. For mothers, there is an uncontrolled pay gap of 75 cents for every dollar earned by a male parent. In a controlled setting, mothers earn 98 cents for every dollar earned by fathers with the same employment characteristics. As you can see, women without children earn more than those with. Let's look deeper into this motherhood penalty. You start off on the left here with factors such as lack of affordable childcare, an unbalanced parental leave system between both parents, too few allowances, and a lack of job flexibility. This leads to mothers rather than fathers being the ones who reduce hours or stop working to take care of the children. This has a knock-on effect for women: less opportunities, jobs with lower pay, the inevitable and dreaded gaps in the CV, skill erosion, and the perception of being less committed to work. Speaking of perception, men don't suffer from the same work commitment issue. On the contrary, there is no fatherhood penalty, but instead a bonus. with fathers increasing their earnings when they become a parent. They also earn more than men who don't have children. I did spend a bit of time on the topic of wages. There is a lot said and written online on the topic, and I think it's important to have an overview. I could have spent more time on it. We could have dug deeper into unpaid work, unemployment rates, looked at specific sectors, and also the numbers by ethnicity. To be honest, it deserves a whole course in itself. Either way, there is no data to back the claim that from an economic perspective, women's rights have gone too far and that men are economically being left behind.
Have different choices and having equality of outcome.
Aha, well, so the overwhelming proportion of people who are in prisons are male. Now, do you want to equalize that, just out of curiosity? What about bricklayers? They're 99% male, and we've got about 3/4 of the population now in universities in the humanities and social sciences are female.
Yeah.
Are we going to equalize that? And men work longer hours. They work more dangerous jobs. They're more likely to move. They're more likely to work outside. They're more likely to participate in jobs in the STEM fields that are scalable. They make more money for those reasons. And that's all hidden under the idea that the reason that men and women make different amounts of money is because of their gender. It's a very simplistic analysis.
I thought this was a good time to play this video. The kind of short clips without context we often come across online. Take a step back from what you think on the topic and analyze the source. It's a 42-second clip of Jordan Peterson on a TV talk show of some kind, answering to a woman whose argument was cut at the beginning, so we don't know what she said, and we furthermore do not hear her reply to Peterson's words. The title of the video is suggestive that Peterson somehow won, owned his opponent, triumphed in a battle. The topic? Feminism in one shape or form. There's a mention of occupational sorting, the job choices men and women make, and the impact on pay. There's a suggestion of the feminism movement having selective quotas for occupations. There's a mention of some of the issues that men specifically face. How close does this bring me to understanding the topic? Not very far, but you can use this as a springboard to learn more. You can look into occupational sorting. Why are women and men more inclined to have certain kinds of jobs? Is there any value in this kind of reasoning? How does gender equality fit into this? Go further. Learn about the history of feminism, the quest for women's rights, how society reacted. Seek to understand the topic before having an opinion on it. After looking at the economic power, we're going to look into the corporate, academic, and political power women have today. Now, every country has different statistics on this, so I do invite you to check up on what's going on where you live. I focused here on the USA. Looking at the graph on the left here, we can see that we have close to an equal amount of women and men entering corporate roles, the junior entry positions. However, by the time we reach the C positions, the top management, this falls to 29%. There are also disparities per race, as you can see, but this is not the focus of this video. For Fortune 500 companies, 11% of them have women CEOs. Looking more broadly at boardroom representation in the Russell 3000 companies, the 3,000 largest publicly held companies on the US stock market, less than a third are held by women. Of the new boardroom appointments, roughly 30% are women. 81% of the time, this was because of boardroom expansion, not by taking up positions held by men. For entrepreneurship, the picture is more nuanced for women. In the USA, a country which encourages entrepreneurship, almost 50% of new entrepreneurs were women. Data does show that the percentage of staffed company owners are still a large majority of men. The picture is just as nuanced in terms of access to investment. If 47% of angel investors are women, women still play minor roles in the VC, venture capitalist world. The graph here on the left shows that female-only founding teams only receive 2% of VC capital. Adopting a global view, 41% of academic researchers are women, with some countries more welcoming of women researchers than others. A few countries are in and around the 50% mark, Argentina, Portugal, Brazil, Spain, while others such as Japan, Egypt, or India are far from parity. The data gets more interesting when we actually look at what research fields women are more likely to be in. There's a very strong representation of women in the nursing field, and close to parity in health sciences, such as medicine or pharmacology, but also neuroscience, biochemistry, genetics. Women are, however, less represented in the STEM fields: computer science, engineering, physics, maths. Interestingly for STEM, we see a pattern similar to what we saw in the corporate world, where 42% of early career academics are women, but this becomes 26% by the time academics are in their advanced careers. In parallel, we can mention how in the USA, 77% of school teachers are women, yet represent only 37.2% of professors. Data check. While doing research for this video, I came across many websites that did not source where the information came from, and even if they did, was this data representative and up to date? Always make sure, and that includes information from learning language models like Claude or ChatGPT, that you can actually check yourself. If not, best ignore anything that cannot be verified. As we saw in the last example of women in education, going deeper in the stats gives us a more complete picture, enabling us to highlight the specific sectors and what type of jobs they take on. This is a fantastic resource compiled by UN Women. I can only imagine the amount of effort that was put into compiling all this information and then presenting it in a digestible, visual format. It gives a very good global overview of women in politics. Zooming in, we can see that the higher in the hierarchy you go, the less women are represented, with only 11.9% of heads of state, such as presidents, and 8.3% as heads of government, such as a prime minister, being women in early 2025. Different countries have different histories and different approaches to gender equality. You may be surprised to see that the top 3 countries with the highest percentage of women in parliament are Rwanda, Cuba, and Nicaragua. Why is that, do you think? At a global level, however, just over a quarter of parliamentarians are women, despite representing roughly half the world's population. Regarding cabinet ministers, again, some countries are more inclined to have women in power than others. At global level, 22.9% of the ministers are women. Now here's a moment to look deeper into the data, and on the graph on the right here we can see that there are certain kinds of ministries that women are more likely to have, but also the portfolios they're less likely to have. Women are more likely to get a ministry in human rights, gender equality, and social affairs than portfolios in economic affairs, home affairs, justice, governments, and defense, for example. Why is that, do you think? By any objective measure of societal power, economic, academic, political, corporate, men as a group are not being left behind by women. If women's rights had gone too far, the data exposed here would paint a very different picture. And I didn't even speak of the problems which show where the balance of power may lie. For example, I did not speak of sexual harassment and violence, which affects women more than men, or of the low conviction rate for rape. This suggests that the goal of feminism, equality, is still a distant one, and one that has not been overshot. So if women have not achieved equality yet, and men have not been overtaken, what is it exactly? Why do some still think that women's rights have gone too far? Time for a critical thinking check. A couple of years ago, I did an online email course about surveys by Pew Research, and this was one of the examples highlighted, showing how the way you ask a question, the choice of words, can influence the outcome. They asked 2 questions to citizens of the USA, as their government was eyeing to remove Saddam Hussein from power in Iraq in 2003. The first question: when asked straight up whether they would favour or oppose taking military action to end Saddam Hussein's rule, 68% favoured. However, if you added the caveat that the US military would suffer casualties, the outcome flips. with more people opposing than favouring military intervention. Keep this in mind as you observe the outcomes of this survey, created by Ipsos of close to 24,000 people, both women and men, aged 18 to 74 in many countries across the world. I'm going to focus here on a few of these questions. If we look at the statement circled here, a majority, 59%, agree that things would work better if more women held positions with responsibilities in government and companies. However, there's 46 and 45% who think that men are being expected to do too much to support equality, and that promoting women's rights have gone so far that there is discrimination against men. What interpretation can we draw from this? Maybe that a majority of women and men agree that gender equality is a goal we should strive for, but there's a belief that it's impacting negatively men. Another survey, this time in the UK from August 2023. For each of the following behaviours or characteristics, participants had to say which were more likely to apply to women, in purple, men, in orange, or both, grey. The correct answers have the stripes on them. Let's start on the left here. A vast majority of people thought, and were correct, in saying that women are more likely to be sexually assaulted, care for family members, live longer. On the right, a majority also correctly assumed that men are more likely to be in full-time employment, be a senior manager, earn a high income, but also die at work, commit suicide, go to prison. Because yes, data shows that there are categories, negative in nature, which hit men more than women. Starting here in the top right, this is data from the USA. You are 3 to 4 times more likely to commit suicide if you are a man than a woman. Below, you are more likely to develop substance abuse and dependency if you are a man. Although, to add some nuance, women are more likely than men to progress more quickly from abuse to addiction, suffer the side effects, and relapse. Looking at the graph on the left, we see that in the USA, 93.5% of prison inmates are men. One study even showed that men received 63% longer sentences on average than women for the same crime and with comparable crime history. The justice system is either coming down too hard on men criminals, or that we are not coming down hard enough on women criminals, as they are also more likely to avoid charges, convictions, and incarceration. Although data is quite difficult to gather on homelessness, on the left here, the US Department of Housing found that 3 in 5 people who are homeless were men. We can see on the right that the vast majority of people that die in the workplace are men. One other category where men are overrepresented is in regard to military service. In early 2026, 60 countries in the world had mandatory military service, but in only 15 of them was it universal, meaning men and women both had to do it, including Denmark, as you can see on the image with the Danish flag on the shoulder, which adopted universal conscription in 2026. What are your thoughts on this? Remember when I spoke of Switzerland increasing the women's retirement age to be in line with that of men? Should universal conscription also be part of the debate around equality? It's undeniable that men face struggles, but what is the cause? Is it feminism, the quest for equality, or is there something else at play? One element to answer this may be the same rigid gender roles that feminism has been fighting all along, something that affects both women and men, a concept called sex stereotyping. Often we hear the term patriarchy, but a more intuitive term might be the man box, which is the set of rigid expectations that society places on men. Be tough, don't show emotion, accept anger. Be the sole provider, never ask for help. Be muscular, be heterosexual. Women also have their box, requiring them to be the primary caregiver and housekeeper, play the role of support to the man in a patriarchal world. Women need to be compassionate, humble, be thin, fertile. This has led to the trad wife and trad husband movements that you can witness today on social media, with both women and men embracing these traditional, conservative point of views and lifestyles. What can start as a rigid view on gender roles can become more extreme and lead to prejudice. I spent a whole morning seeking these posts and videos out on social media. I must say I felt on edge after it. It's incessantly negative, aggressive, combative, and tirelessly paints a soul-drenching, bad picture of the opposing sex. The manosphere is a varied collection of online content, social media accounts, websites, blogs, and forums promoting masculinity. Andrew Tate, pictured here on the left, is one such figure. On the surface, there is something empowering to the content he creates, for young men in particular. If on the one hand he pushes men to take care of their bodies, be active, entrepreneurial, get a hold of their lives, on the other hand, it is clearly misogynist and in active opposition to feminism, promoting a patriarchal view of society where men are rich, muscular, dominating, at the top of the ladder, women in predefined boxes below. Pushing further, the manosphere speaks of reverse sexism, discrimination against men, saying there is an anti-male prejudice. Taking it even further, you can go down the path of the incel movement, male involuntary celibacy, a community of heterosexual men who blame women and society for their lack of romantic success, a community connected with hatred and violence against women. The femosphere is the female equivalent of the manosphere, an umbrella term for the body of online spaces that focus on discussions among women and girls that are broadly speaking misandrist, hateful of, or prejudiced against men and boys. Like for its male counterpart, there is an emphasis on physical appearance, talking about looks maximizing one's appearance to weaponize beauty, get ahead in society, win the game of life. One can even come across female dating strategists who encourage women to find men simply to support them financially. It must be said that there is less research on the femosphere, but the scope is different. There can be misandry, but the femcel movement, for example, blames celibacy more on their own appearance, their inability to conform to a beauty standard, rather than the opposing sex. Now we have to take this one step further. People are making money and gaining influence from sex stereotyping. On the left is a screenshot from Andrew Tate's website, where he sells success courses, life skills to learn to be an entrepreneur and make money. Tate, like others, are riding the wave, creating content designed to shock, to play on emotions, to generate clicks and rage. These videos, like the one in the middle, are not designed to teach about gender relations, to give you a balanced view of a complex issue. They're designed so that you click, watch, react, share. The more you view, the more you feed the machine. They have a bigger share of ad money. They become more attractive to advertisers for product placement. And there are some politicians who thrive on this, part of Donald Trump's strategy to appeal to the young men demographic ahead of the 2024 US elections, involved him being interviewed on the Manosphere podcasts. The idea that women are racing ahead and leaving men behind is incorrect. Not economically, not politically, not in access to funding, not in the corporate or academic circles. There is no evidence to show that feminism, the women's rights movement for greater equality, has gone too far. We have to acknowledge that over the last decades, societies have made significant progress towards gender equality. Although this varies greatly on the country and what we're speaking about. Even if the law treats both genders equally, the reality is that women live in a system with prejudicial bias towards men. Women do not have an unfair advantage. In fact, they face barriers that men often don't have. Culture wars are easy. A scapegoat is found, passions ignited, fear stoked up. The scapegoat is then targeted relentlessly. Feminism is not a threat. It's not the cause of a perceived societal decay and weakness. It's not the cause of wage stagnation, inflation. Is it because of feminism that it's increasingly harder to buy a property? Is it because of feminism that there are less job opportunities, that promotions are scarce? Or is it because of global economic forces, corporate policy, lack of investment, political decisions? But that is not to minimize the issues men specifically face. The feeling of being left out of the conversation is real. There's an awkward position, especially for young men, in the evolving conversations around equality. We've made steps in encouraging women into traditionally male-dominated spaces, seeking to redefine gender norms. Have we done the same for men? Men can be fantastic teachers for young children, nurses, ballet dancers. They can be top-notch stay-at-home parents, be in touch with their emotions, empathetic. In the same way, women can be excellent soldiers, masons, weightlifters, engineers. They can be businesslike, career-focused, cool under pressure. The fight for equality involves both women and men, and part of this fight involves breaking away from rigid sex stereotyping. The influencers who live off this, for all their talk of gender empowerment, are actually about gender constraint, putting people in boxes, like a prison cell with flames as cell bars. If you're a woman, you don't have to be a tradwife, nor do you have to be a careerist who shuns family life. If you're a man, you don't have to be a heterosexual who goes to the gym, makes money on the stock market, and drives a fast car. You can be all these things, but you don't have to be. What matters is you have the choice. No barriers are put in your way to follow your aspirations. We are stronger together. If men are more likely to die at work, how can we improve the safety of the dangerous jobs? If men are more likely to commit suicide or become addicted to substances, these are mental and public health issues that concern us all. The same way that men need to be part of the conversation in eradicating violence against women. We are stronger together. Studies into the much maligned DEI measures, diversity, equity, and inclusion, in the workplace have shown that diverse management and executive teams actually outperform homogeneous ones. Surely our military, our institutions, our democracy would benefit from that. We are stronger together. How can we work to remove the motherhood penalty, alleviate some of the pressures of childcaring for both parents? I could go on. I hope this video has opened up your mind, maybe shown you a different side to this debate. I know this is a topic that divides, but why should it? No one aside from charlatans online are gaining from putting us in boxes and painting feminism as the enemy. Women and men are allies, and together we can do better.